the best bartenders that I know, and I'm certainly not one of them. There's a lot of bartenders that are so much better at what they do than I am. But I think about the best bartenders that I know, and I think one of the things that makes them so good is that they're multifaceted. They have experiences that want you to want to hear their stories, and you want to sit at their bar and you want to talk
Hmm.
to them about whatever it is, whether it's like a deep love of baseball or a travel itch that they've scratched many times, or living abroad, or working different fields.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome back, friends. It is time for another episode of Decoding Cocktails. I am Chris LeBeau, and thank you for joining us. Before we get into today's episode, we are here in the middle of November at this point, peeking into the holiday season, debatably right on the front end, depending on how you want to start counting things. And so one thing that I thought would be a fun experience for folks, and also an educational one and delicious, is I'm going to be hosting some mezcal tastings in person this holiday season, in part because this category is so popular, it is so delicious, but frankly, it is also very daunting. The variety of plants that can be used, where they're grown, how long they're grown for, how they're processed, all of these things can go ahead and impact that. And so while I know quite a bit about this, frankly, I know that I'm going to be hitting the books really hard, revisiting conversations I've had to make sure I'm prepared. So if you'd be interested, please check them out, decodingcocktails.com/event. There will also be a link in the show notes. My guest today is Jeff Savage. He is the head bartender at The Botanist, which is a restaurant and bar at the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel in Vancouver, Canada. And I was interested to talk with Jeff because, look, in so many cocktail bars out there right now, you have all sorts of wild and crazy and fun things happening. There can be very simple riffs on classics. You can also have things that are incredibly complex. And there's all sorts of different alchemy and science going on out there. But at The Botanist, one thing that's true is Jeff and his team actually have what they call a cocktail lab. So they have a full-on dedicated space that is visible, but it is their prep space, but also a place where they can really do really in-depth cocktail presentations. And so for someone who is really working to push the limits on what all a cocktail is, what can go into it, what can we do to these things, I thought that would be a fun conversation. And so I asked Jeff, and he took time to talk through two different cocktails. One that seemingly looks simple, but still requires quite a bit of prep effort in order for him to be able to quickly pour something into a glass for you. And another one that really requires quite a bit of engineering. Some of these things went on hiatus during COVID, but they are kind of ramping back up right now. And to that point, I should acknowledge that, one of the big liquor holding companies is called Diageo, and Diageo has an annual competition called World Class. And it's typically people compete by country and then globally. And so in 2019, Jeff won Canada's regional or national award, whatever you want to call that, and then placed second in the global competition. So props to him. And Michelin, the guide, just gave the Fairmont an exceptional cocktail award. So good for them. It was also validating and useful to think about that we have witnessed cocktails. They're just on this trajectory right now, which is really exciting. But Jeff said one thing that he is thankful for is that when they were building out the Botanist, the bar was not an afterthought. It wasn't, well, once we get the kitchen designed, then we'll worry about the bar. It was, let's focus on both things at the same time. Jeff says this makes sure that they have the proper amount of space to prep in. They're not bumping up against the kitchen. And frankly, they're not viewed as second class. They really see themselves as a very collaborative partner of the kitchen, and they feel like they're an equal valued member of the team. And so that was really interesting to hear. A little thing that I think is important and just worth noting, and this really gets to how much do you want to be fussy over cocktails to begin with, but you'll hear that Jeff talks several times about weighing stuff. And I remember watching a masterclass conversation with Chef Thomas Keller from the French Laundry, and him talking about that really at the end of the day, you should take your measuring cups and measuring spoons and you should throw them all away. Keller's thing was that weight is the only way to be certain about what you really have. And so for Jeff and his team, who are really pushing things to the limit in a 5-star hotel, so obviously exceptional quality is expected, it sounds like they weigh pretty much everything. And I thought that was something good to come back to. So final thing, Jeff does kind of quickly rattle off a bunch of equipment that they use in their lab. I will have links to all of that so that you can look any of it up if you'd like to. Finally, if you want to see the lovely space Jeff gets to work in, that is at Botanist Dining. And his Instagram handle is at Father of Cups. I forgot to ask him what that's all about, but I'll have to chase him down and see what that's all about. So that's what I've got for today. Enjoyed today's lesson. Like I said, everything's in the show notes. And so here you have it, Jeff Savage of The Botanist. Jeff, thanks so much for taking some time to talk today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm always interested to start with, is there a moment you remember falling in love with or deciding you were going to commit to this industry at some point in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. There was, for me, it maybe it was a stream of moments that kind of came together, but a little bit of my backstory is that I worked for the University of Alberta for a number of years in kind of like an academic role, and specifically in sustainability. And if anybody's worked in academia, I think the first thing that is that it's very stressful, long hours, and very little pay. Which it made it a little bit difficult to find a work-life balance. And I did some really cool things with the university. We had an award-winning program. We created what is now the Office of Sustainability. I traveled around the world with it. But when it was coming to have my contract renewal process, I was walking to university, I was walking to campus every day. And there was an old grimy pizza place right by the university. I walked by every day, and one day it sold. And I slowly learned that it sold to these 3 guys that were interested in opening up like a small plates cocktail bar kind of thing. And I could tell it was these 3 guys because it was always the 3 of them that were working on it, like putting the work in and building the bar out and, building the kitchen and all of that. And, it was a small place, so you could see it every day I was walking by, you could see it. And, it just was really inspiring. I love the idea of working with your hands, with your hearts kind of at the same time. And I missed that. And I missed, connecting to what felt like, the real world outside of academia. So the week that I was supposed to sign my contract, I walked into their bar instead, and they hadn't been open yet. But I was like, this is really cool watching you build this space out. Hire me, and they did. Yeah, they hired me as kind of the opening bar guy, and I was there for like 4 years, and that was like a really transformative space for me. Obviously, like changing careers so it just, yeah, that, I guess that moment of just realizing, like, these people are building what they want to build, and they're building it passionately, was really inspiring to me.
And so when you came into that, Jeff, were you brand new to hospitality at that point, or did you kind of have the casual experience, or were you like, hey, I'm just going to build it from the ground up right here, right now?
I definitely wasn't fresh to it. I mean, I had been working in kitchens during my education. I'd been working in restaurants as a server bartender. So yeah, no, I've definitely been around a little bit, but I think it was more casual. I always think about like that 90-10 split in our industry. That
Mhm.
90% of, like, we're here to get paid and to go on and do other things, which is totally great. And that 10%, of course, being people like me that spend their lives doing all of these things. But I think that was that moment that, like, that 90% me turned into that 10% me.
Got it. No, that's helpful. And is there, in addition to knowing, like I've kind of learned that in my own career, in my own arc, of finding this later in life, uh, is there, as you kind of settled into it, what are some of the things about that first jump right there with them that you are most proud of, or remember in terms of really helping solidify that decision for you?
That's a good question. Something I should probably have thought about beforehand too, right? Introspectively. Um, I think one of the things that was really clear to me was that, like, being in academia and speaking on like a academic stage and all of that, I was never really like a shy person. But I think that I just like most people had difficulty, like, really engaging with strangers and people that I hadn't met and people that I didn't have any sort of like reason to interact with. Um, so that really helped that for me, and like that, just like that little touch of personal growth was really helpful. Um, you know, we opened this bar, and it was like a pretty it was a pretty rudimentary scene in Edmonton, Alberta, where we did it. And we put on 10 cocktails on our list, and it like blew people's minds because they had never had an old fashioned before, that didn't have like a cherry muddled into it and stuff like that. So I think just seeing like the reaction and the elation that people had when you're like really providing them like something quite simple, but something fundamental and something, really high quality. And I think anybody who's had that switch from, going to university and spending like way too long and way too much money doing the thing, I had to explain it to my parents as well, which is it's like not super fun at the beginning. Like, okay, so you did this thing, and now you're going to be a bartender. So, yeah. But we had an experience where, this restaurant never did brunch, but we decided, in our like second year, to do one day of brunch because, people keep asking, and it's like, we'll give you one day. And my parents lived about 3 hours away, and they decided to come up for it. And so they came to the restaurant, and it was a first come first serve brunch. And
Mhm.
man, I kid you not, the lineup to get in our restaurant spanned like a block and a half. Like, it was this huge lineup,
Wow.
and they just were, as my parents were able to walk right in and like sit down in front of my bar, and then it was like seeing it click for them, and then also like seeing that I could, do that for the people that I love, really was like, yeah, this is it, this is right.
Well, I'll also say one, I'm glad that they were able to get on board with it. But I think about people I've met in this world who they've had all that schooling or all that time in a career, and they never ever, despite the fact that they don't care for it, ever walk away. And it's like, okay, that's the whole cost of. Well, I studied, so I guess I just have to suffer through this for the rest of my life, as opposed to being able to take the leap into the new thing. So good for you. Uh,
Thank you.
so I did see, as we kind of dug into research on you a little bit, that something about bartending in Thailand at a resort. Did this come, Jeff, before after this place in Alberta, or was this something that happened earlier on for you?
Yeah, that was probably my first really like experience behind a bar. And it's like pretty silly, you know. I think you're giving it too much credence. I'll be honest with you, Chris. it's it's it. So I decided, you know, I had been accepted to university, and I don't know what it was, but I decided I wanted to furlough that and go travel for, you know, the better part of a year.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend and I found ourselves, yeah, in Thailand as like, you know, 19-year-old kids, which was, you know, a pretty wild culture shock to begin with. One of the first places we went to was a little island called Koh Lanta, and we fell in love with this couple that was just kind of like running a, you know, a little, not even like a resort, I don't know, like a bar restaurant with, you know, a bunch of like little houses attached to it. Really sweet couple though. And they decided to just offer us the opportunity to like get behind that bar and kind of, you know, work for our room and board kind of thing. So we did that, and it was, I mean, honestly, it's like so simple. You know, it was, you know, people making, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of that bucket. Have you ever heard of a Thai bucket before?
In process of prep for this, I saw you write about it, but despite having been to Thailand, I have never had the pleasure of one. So,
They're a smart man. They're a smart man. They have you might have had Sangsom before. They call it Thai whiskey. I think it's
mhm.
actually distilled with sugarcane though. Um, but it's a small bottle of that, a small bottle of Coca Cola, and one of the Thai Red Bulls in a bucket. It's like maybe, well, you, I don't know. You can imagine what that does to a person.
Yeah.
But things like that, and then like, what do they? They wanted me to create a Canadian cocktail, so we did like the Canadian Sling, which I think was just like rye and ginger ale and like, I don't know, grenadine, maybe like something really really dumb. Um, but yeah, no, that was like honestly a pretty rudimentary experience, but I still do carry that to my core to this day, specifically because of the couple that
Mhm.
hosted us there. You know, he was from southern China, she's from Thailand, and like they took turns cooking for us and
Mhm.
teaching us techniques and stuff like that. And man, that food and the way that they prepared things, like that really changed how I thought about food. Um, you know, and how I thought about like uh paying honor to ingredients and stuff like that. I mean, we were right on the beach, and you know, Mia was her name. We would like get fish like coming in, you know, regularly, and she would get so excited about these different types of fish that like, man, as a 19-year-old prairie kid, I had no idea what they were about. So you know, yeah, I got the experience of like making a couple drinks, but I think moreover, it just showed me how broad this whole hospitality world is, you know, and the differences in, you know, appreciation and yeah, I guess maybe teleologically you can look at like, I can look at thinking about these people being so excited about what they had, and you know what they had was a small bar and, you know, a couple of rooms on a beautiful beautiful beach. um, and maybe teleologically looking at that and seeing, you know, the passion that I saw with the guys in Edmonton, I could see some similarities to that, I suppose.
What's the line? If you're not happy with what you have, you won't ever be happy with. I forget the line exactly, but yeah, I think, you know, if you're not happy where you are, how will you ever be happy somewhere else? And this idea of practicing some level of gratitude for, you know, you're not running a, you know, 400 bedroom resort, you know, called the Ritz. You know, you have a modest thing, but if you can take great pride in that, you know, there's really something to that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
So between Thailand and, if I understand, you know, maybe as you were kind of working all your time in academia, it seems like you also, if I'm correct, spent a good chunk of time in the Middle East. Are there, when you think about that travel as a whole, are there ways it shifted you or it kind of helped inform what you do today at all?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I don't know that I would be the person that I am without having that travel backbone. Um, and it's hard for me to like really pinpoint down what that looked like, but um, when it comes to Middle East, it specifically was for the most part centered in Turkey. I did a kind of last final year of my school in there, and then I spent a good chunk of time kind of traveling through the entire country. And I mean, I think about it like the best bartenders that I know, and I'm certainly not one of them. There's a lot of bartenders that are so much better at what they do than I am, but I think about the best bartenders that I know, and I think one of the things that makes them so good is that they're multifaceted. They have experiences that want you to want to hear their stories, and you want to sit at their bar and you want to talk
Hmm.
to them about whatever it is, whether it's like a deep love of baseball or a travel itch that they've scratched many times, or living abroad, or working different fields. Like, I think for me, the more people that I know in this industry that have this kind of like multifaceted aspects of their life, which I mean, granted, I think most people do, um, but that broad experience can be really useful. And I mean, I bring it into a fact that yes, I can talk about flavors that might not come to other people's minds, because I've had those experiences. Like, I love to use rose, and I use rose in a lot of different ways,
Hmm.
because specifically of some of the things that I had in Turkey, like
Got
pickled
it.
rose thorns, which I didn't know you could eat until I ate them. um, and yeah, I just think, additionally, outside of making cocktails and preparing flavor in combinations, like, I work in a hotel. I work in a 5-star hotel that has people that visit from all over the world, and it seems really connective and really special to be like, oh yeah, I spent time in your city. I love your city, and I can tell you, like, we can talk about spaces that we've both been to in Turkey, or in wherever it is. And I really do value the connective nature of travel for that reason. I can we can talk about experiences that we've had together, and I think that's really valuable.
Agreed 100%. And I think about, my own times and travels and just having to be so, uh, I don't know if uncomfortable is the right word, but out of your own rhythm of how the world works, Yeah, like I mean, having been to Thailand, having lived in Malaysia, it certainly is a thing where you learn there's certainly the way life is lived, and then there's a whole bunch of other ways too that kind of in addition to helping you see how that life people live, it just gives you so much more empathy for the different facets people are up against every day in their life.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. I wrote a lot when I was traveling, and a line that I think about, like, this is like self-indulgent because it's a line that I wrote,
Mhm.
but a line that I think about all the time is like, me as a 19-year-old kid writing, like, I didn't realize that I could see my culture so differently standing outside of it. Seeing who I am, and where I come from the outside, it really changed what I see about myself, and see about the world I live in. And I'm sure you're the exact same way when it comes to that.
100%. Yeah, it's yeah, certainly being able to look back at your country from afar is a wild and interesting experience everybody should sign themselves up for at some point.
I agree.
So you mentioned, obviously being at a five-star hotel sounds lovely. So speaking of that, pretty much everybody out there listening has been to a cocktail bar before, but I don't know that a lot of people have necessarily been to what might be called a cocktail lab. What in the heck is that, and what would I expect if I walked into one?
Wow, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess just a little bit of context. Every other restaurant and bar that I've worked at, the bar has the bar space, of course, and I think that if it seems like most bars and restaurants that I've worked at, the bar is actually like the afterthought. Like, oh, we'll build a really cool bar top, and we'll build, like, whatever it is, a bar with a ladder so you can have 500 bottles of scotch up there, which is like awesome. Don't get me wrong, but functionally speaking, I mean, 99% of the time that I've worked at a bar, with the exception of where I'm at right now, we don't have a space to make our own prep and do our own ingredients and that kind of thing. We're kind of based around when the kitchen is not in use, or
Hmm.
based around when there's no guests in house, and working on the bar top, which can obviously be sticky and greasy and like you name it. So our lab functions first and foremost for us to craft ingredients and to build kind of the invisible labor and the things that you don't see going into our cocktails. It's attached to our bar. There's a glass kind of dome around it, so you can look into it, and there's some neat ingredients and things going on there. Yeah, but it gives us a space to do things like ferments and long infusions and you name it. We've got a couple of really unique tools in there. We've got a centrifuge. We've got our vac sealer, which is like literally the most critical piece of equipment in our bar. We've got our rotary evaporator, which is quite exciting to use as well, and is like shown first and foremost when you come into the bar, and it just shows that we like science. I guess is what it looks like. It looks like science. I don't know how else to describe a rotary evaporator, but um, we have our dry ice. We have our fridges and our freezers are in there. Our dehydrator is in there. Our like even things as simple as our pocket refractometer are in there, and like things that we use to craft all the flavors and all the things that we do for our bar program. Now we also have a series of cocktails. I will say they're on hiatus right now as we do kind of rebuild our bar team after the ravages of the last couple of years. But our style of bar, essentially, we have our regular cocktail list, which I will be honest with you, has like lots and lots and lots of behind the scenes work going into all those cocktails. But we also, again, with the caveat of those being on pause right now, have a lab series, and those drinks are a lot more elaborate, a lot more like bigger presentation pieces, drinks that bring in. We have all of our drinks on that menu bring in a different element of nature. So we have like earth, air, fire, water, spirits as our basis for those, and yeah, there's like those cocktails come out of our lab. We have a little space specifically for those. They're made to kind of excite and inspire and make people laugh and be quite fun in that regard. So yeah, I mean the lab is quite multi-purpose, I suppose. It also gives us an
Hmm.
opportunity to step off the bar and have a glass of water or just take a breath, because we are quite a busy space. But yeah, I ultimately it really is just, it's absolutely wonderful to have a dedicated space that we can focus on ingredient preparation, but also I can work through training, and I can stand and work through the creation of new ingredients with our bar team and that kind of thing.
Well, I guess a couple of things. One, I think we've got your tagline, come to the cocktail lab. It looks like science, I think would be. Uh,
Quoted.
but I also really like that your point of even if it's hard for someone to visualize, what does it look like to put a bar space forward, to put it first? I think we can also say, like, okay, what does it look like when we're not uh putting a bar space where it belongs, in terms of, not being, having to prioritize their own prep around the kitchen, and not like that we should suddenly be penalizing the kitchen, but like, if we're taking this stuff really seriously, here is the kind of environment that's going to enable people to do the hard work, as opposed to try to fit it in when possible.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like you hit the nail on the head there too, because like our restaurant program, our kitchen is like phenomenal, and they are doing the exact same things. Like,
Right.
chef is dry aging duck for 20 days in house, and he's like dry aging fish and doing all the ferments, and so like I would never want to have what we do impact on what they want to do, and vice versa. I think having worked in spaces with some really talented chefs, some really amazing individuals, I would say that the program that we have here has it always blows me away what the kitchen does, and the ability that Chef Hector Laguna, who's our executive chef, he's so willing to collaborate, and he's so excited and so open, and we do a lot of collaborative dinners and experiences. And maybe part of it is the fact that we have our own space and he has his, like
Yeah.
I've had roommates and we get along until we don't. And because it's, maybe you're in a 2-bedroom apartment and it's tiny and like somebody didn't clean up after themselves when they had breakfast. And it's like, those little things can really irritate you, and maybe we just have the luxury of having, we live in our own apartments. We just happen to be like Jerry and Kramer, on one side and the other.
I would like to take a minute to note that's the first time we've had a Jerry and Kramer reference on this podcast. So let that not be the last. That's good. That's so, you know your own program better than me. So I don't want to bite off what could be like an 18-minute answer here, but I am interested in all the invisible labor that goes into putting these, whether it's something that is truly, over the top thing from the lab, or just I'm sure at your bar program. So I guess I was curious, is there a drink that you could maybe that takes, some reasonable amount of effort to produce? Would you mind talking through with us what it takes to get that drink roughly from start to finish? And if that's too complex of a question, we can always punt on it there.
No, I think that's a great question. And some things that seem so simple and straightforward, yeah, like they can be quite complex. I'll think of two really quickly, and it won't be 18 minutes, but I'll talk about one that seems really, really simple and one that is quite complex. The first one is our Botanist's martini. It's a house martini. And I put this on the menu a little while ago, and it's been so popular and I love it so much that we've just kind of kept it on for a while. It is like, if anybody's been to a bar that does this, it's not uncommon, but it's a freezer martini. So what that means, we at the bar literally we have a freezers behind our wells. We pull a bottle out and pour 5 ounces of this martini into your glass and garnish it, and there you go. So it's like really simple. But Chris, you say like invisible labor. I like that. I think that I think about our bar program like a kitchen would in a lot of ways. Like the mise en place is really important to us, and all that work behind scenes. So I give you like a really clean and really simple and thoughtful presentation at the beginning in front of a guest. So the freezer martini, it took, like, of all the drinks that we have on our menu, that one took me the longest to perfect, because
wow,
a martini is so simple, right? It's your spirit base, your modifier, and maybe a dash of a enhancer. So the drink itself, we weigh everything. So we weigh 3 different gins. That took us a good amount of time to kind of figure out which gin and what level we want to use. We use a local gin here and from the US and one from the UK. We have our own house-made sherry-based vermouth that we also weigh in there and throw that in as well by weight. And then as our modifier, or like our, technically like our orange bitter dash, basically in the martini, we have 4 different infusions that we blend together to make what we call our Seaborn tincture. So the Seaborn tincture includes wild spruce tips, wild elderflower, lemon verbena, and salt water. And we blend those all together in ratio, and then add that into our martini batch. And then we use reverse osmosis water to, again, by weight, dilute it to the percentage that we want. and then that goes into the freezer, and we don't have to worry about it, which is quite nice. And that, like, our garnish, like, the thing about this is when you do something like that and it's a really simple pour, you can get more elaborate with things like the garnish and the presentation. So our
Mm-hmm.
garnish is an oyster leaf. It's colloquially known as an oyster leaf. It's the plant is called a sea bluebell, and so that, like, they call it that because it grows in the intertidal zone. It's a little brassica, and it, when you
Mm.
eat it, it's got that, like, richness and oiliness of an oyster. Like, it tastes like an oyster. It's quite fun.
Mm.
And then we finish that on top, where it looks like the bluebell leaf just feels like it's shaped to hold in moisture. I think you can picture, like, some of those plants that when it rains, it just kind of, like, the dewdrops kind of stick to it. So we create a what we call a vegan caviar, which
Mm.
is a cucumber pearl that we spherify the cucumber, we lacto ferment it, and then we kind of pressure treat it with elderflower and absinthe and the cucumber juice as well. So yeah, that's like one drink.
Yeah. Hey, could I feel like a couple of these things I've heard before, but just make sure, like, so for people at home, the um the cucumber that you were spherifying, so is this when, like, the texture of it breaks down so much that essentially, like, it will collapse on itself? Like, would you mind explaining what it means to spherify
Yeah,
a
yeah.
cucumber, please?
Yeah, I mean, the spherification thing that I'm talking about is, like, really simple. We're using a melon baller to make a little sphere out of it, but the whole process of that, we do that, and then we compress it in a vac seal bag. And when you compress it, you're allowing the cellular walls and the pores of that ingredient to open, and we're
Hmm.
marinating it with that the absinthe, the elderflower, the cucumber juice, and then we're adding the salts to induce a little bit of lacto fermentation as well. So when you get the pearl, it's like the text. Like, if I have to tell people all the time that what it is, because it feels so different. It looks so different, and, like, it tastes, like, so unique. The
Yeah.
cucumber obviously brings its own flavor, but, like, that cucumber, absinthe, elderflower, salt combination is such a nice combination. So yeah, that's what I mean by spherify. And
Got
we
it.
just simply put vegan caviar on the menu because I don't want to bore everybody with the details if they just are in for a martini. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to order a martini here. I don't need a 7-minute explanation. No, that's great. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
Go ahead.
so the second one I can talk about. This is our cocktail called Into the Ether. This is one, like I said, again, we're currently pausing just because we have a much smaller bar team than when we a couple of years ago, 2019, I guess we'll say. But this one is quite fun as well, and it's one that we took to Amsterdam and won a global title with the Bulls Around the World, world's best bar team. It's quite fun. So Bulls Geneva is our base. That it's got that richness, that oiliness. It's kind of think like a think a martini esque, I guess. But what we wanted to do, I said with our lab cocktails, we have earth, air, fire, water, and this was our last one, the spirit, ether, as you
Mhm.
want to call it. And thinking about, like, how it can kind of incorporate all those, like, the earthiness, the like, light, airy, floral freshness, the fire, like, the water, all of those things. So Bulls Geneva is our base, and we make this is, like, way too complex. Using Okanagan based white wine, and then just, like, rapidly infusing some ingredients, slow infusing some other ones, which we end up putting our part of our vermouth. We've put in the freezer and then just, like, slowly infused so it doesn't go as fast. Um, and then we've got things like a smoked white tea that we use. That's a cold infusion, and then it's, like, very, very lightly smoked. A touch of peated whiskey, a touch of maraschino liqueur, and so all those things come together. And then in our lab, when we were building it, basically we had created these boxes that had space for dry ice. we would add the dry ice into this box. We would aromatize the dry ice, specifically with grapefruit oil
Mm.
and a little bit of spruce tip oil. And then when you present the drink, it's a really complex presentation. You get this box, our glass is on the side, and our carafe of the diluted and created cocktail. The bartender would bring the box, and we always have a little bit of a discussion about what our inspiration is. And I like to tell my bartenders to think about it like a cocktail presentation in a competition, which is kind of fun that we can offer that to our guests. Put down the box, we pour in a little carafe of hot water into the dry ice that's underneath. It starts to billow and create a little cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And then inside the box we had basically like a little magnet station that we could click the glass into place, and it actually floats. It floats in place. It floats over a cloud. Give it a light spin, and then pour the cocktail into the glass as well. It's they're really fun. It's really elaborate. You can see why I can't do that with 3 bartenders right now.
Yeah, I would imagine that takes a couple of minutes to pull off. Yeah. Yeah. And what was it? I think I saw you say somewhere like the difference between a bartender and a mixologist is about 10 minutes or something like that. I think that's one of your lines. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. So a couple of things, just like ground level questions or explanations for people out there. Would you mind talking about Geneva a little bit? I feel like for some people that could be a thing. They've seen the bottle, they've even tasted it in a drink, but frankly, held to a point to ask to describe it, they'd be like, what's that again? So would you mind giving us a baseline of that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the Dutch national spirit. So anybody who's been to Amsterdam has probably had it. Specifically in a style of service called kopstoetjes, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly, but it's quite a fun presentation. It's a little tulip glass that they fill to the absolute meniscus and have a beer on the side. And the whole point is you can't pick up the glass without spilling it, so you have to like lean down and sip from the meniscus.
Mm-hmm.
Kopstoetjes, or however you want to say that word, means like headbutt, because the first time people do it, they often hit their head on the beer that's served beside them, which is quite funny. But the spirit itself is like earthy, malty, like oily, and like very flavorful, and often a lot of flavors that don't necessarily translate into the Western palate, which is kind of interesting. So I like to describe it, when people have never heard of it before, who've never had it before, I like to describe it as basically the precursor to gin.
Mm-hmm.
Historically speaking, you have the English and the Dutch warring. You have them like doing the whole thing, and the English were watching these Dutch soldiers like quaff something and go into battle, and they coined it Dutch courage, which you might have heard that term before.
Yep.
And like that connection with the Dutch was what really started the gin craze in England. So it's similar insofar as it's a fairly neutral spirit that's been flavored with different ingredients. You can almost think about it like maybe like in many parts of Europe, especially northern and Eastern Europe, you had vodka, and the way it translated from different places. You can think about how it went. I guess you can think about it going south, and people adding things like anise and licorice root to making things like rake and ouzo and sambuca.
Mm-hmm.
It went north to Scandinavia, and you had people make akkeviet, with caraway and dill seed. When it came to the Dutch, they did a couple different things. That first of all, they infused it with a lot of different things, but they also made it with malted grain, which gives this kind of like textural creaminess and mouthfeel that's pretty strange, like I said, to like a North American palate. But then they infused it with a lot of different things. Genever or Jenever, or again, I'm not Dutch, so I'm not really sure 100% how to pronounce it, but that's the Dutch word for juniper. So you can kind of see that connection
Mm.
with gin, and so as it moved forward, the British, as they are so wont to do, kind of adopting something from another culture and making it their own, turned it into what we now know as gin. Infusing juniper and dropping the malted grain kind of aspect of it, um, and creating, I think, what is a little bit more well known than Geneva. I think it's a little bit easier on the palate, but that's kind of like the rudimentary explanation. It's a little bit like an old world gin almost. When you read old books about cocktails and stuff, it's often used just under some different monikers as well. But yeah, that's kind of the Cole's notes of it all.
That was that whole vodka to Sambuca to Aquavit to Geneva thing. That was really, really cool. I'm gonna yeah, that was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
That was a cool little explanation about how things can start with a basic base and kind of become their own based on what you're infusing in. I liked that.
it's
Thank you.
fun, right? Yeah.
hmm with all of the I also wanted to ask, you talked about aromatizing the ice. I think it was with grapefruit. And my question was, is this something, Jeff, that the ice freezes and then you are dropping the aroma on the surface? Or are you, for example, like putting grapefruit oil into water and then putting that into ice molds?
I should be clear about that one. That when we're talking about that one, I'm using dry ice.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Never mind.
So
Yep.
so the dry ice, we add in a little bit of oils, and that it's such a cool vector because you can like physically see the vapors and stuff, but it also pulls out all the aromas. But yeah, that's what I mean when I'm talking about that one.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I was just thinking of little tricks people could try at home there. Got it. Okay. My guess is a
Use
lot of
your
people
own
don't
dry
have
ice.
dry. Yeah, a lot of people probably don't have dry ice at home. So never mind. All right.
Yeah.
Uh, but so to that point, and this could obviously be real basic here and don't no need to overtax the brain, but I was curious for people that, want to play cocktail lab in miniature at home, are there any basic uh, infusions or things you might suggest somebody try that they're not going to necessarily need a centrifuge for or whatever that might be fun to throw into a classic they're already making?
Totally. Yeah. One of our more popular drinks, and actually one of the simpler ones on our menu right now, is called the Cape Padre. And that cocktail it's basically a Negroni. It's just a little bit of a different build.
Okay.
Instead of sweet vermouth, we're using a Spanish white vermouth.
Okay.
Instead of Campari, we're using Aperol, and instead of gin, we're using tequila that's been infused with cranberries, wild cranberries.
Hmm.
That's honestly quite a simple way to do it, but the flavors are quite neat. We augment it with a couple dashes of orange blossom water, and then add a grapefruit twist. But the combination of those ingredients with the cranberry really nice, because cranberries tannic, and it's more of a smell to it, I guess, than a flavor.
Yep.
That one is super simple. We add, per bottle, we add 125 grams of cranberry. We let it sit for basically a day and a half. After the first day, we kind of break all the skins and let the tequila really infuse into it. But yeah, that one is like super simple, really easy to make, and like really flavorful. Especially, I think that over the past, say, decade or so, I think people are getting more excited about tequila.
Yep.
So that's a really fun one to kind of introduce. It tastes like bright and fresh, even though it reads and sounds a little bit more stirred and Negroni like. But adding the cranberry, the Aperol, the orange blossom water is really nice.
Hmm.
Another thing I think is really useful, and something that again we use a lot, is tea. We use a
Yep.
lot of different types of tea here. We get really weird with it, and we get like Canadian smoked like Canadian wood smoked teas, and we get white teas and pu'er and oolong and like again some really nerdy stuff. But you don't have to get that nerdy. I mean, things like a simple syrup that's made with like Earl Grey is delicious and
Yeah.
so versatile. Or something with green tea. I mean, I think that people make fun of me at our bar a lot because I am quite obsessed with tea, and I love the way that it's a simple way to extract so much flavor and so much texture as well.
Mhm.
So maybe using those kind of things, instead of a classic simple syrup, maybe using a black tea simple syrup for your old fashioned can work really well, or
Mm.
using a dash of green tea simple syrup to add a little bit of, like, even a small dash into a classic martini to add a little bit of texture, and green tea tannins can be really fun too.
Yeah, Jeff, and I think I've seen people write about this before. So the idea is if you're using kind of a richer syrup, you don't want to use a lot of it. But like in the case of building a martini, and let's just say it's a classic 2 parts gin, 1 part vermouth, adding a dash or a bar spoon or something. And I don't know where would be too much, but essentially that's going to soften the flavor a bit and create a little bit more texture. Is that kind of the read right there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, a martini is a textural cocktail, and it's a really simple one. And I always like to say that martinis are like the most democratic cocktail there is, because you can really have it like whatever way you want,
Yep.
um, and there's no really wrong way. But yeah, adding a little bit, like honestly, a dash, or
Yep.
yeah, a bar spoon, half a bar spoon into your martini. I mean, martinis, especially if the gin you're using is quite hot, or the vermouth you're using is a little bit lighter bodied, like they can come off quite sharp. And I think to a palate that isn't super well versed in drinking, like straight spirits and things like that, it can be a little bit abrasive. So adding something in like that, like, you're exactly right. That can be really helpful in making something that maybe a little bit more palatable for somebody.
And Jeff, since they're close kissing cousins or whatever the term is, for somebody that's uh, given more of a shot at a Manhattan, would a dash play there? Obviously, we're talking about an aged spirit and a sweet vermouth, but if someone's looking to, and part of it could just be having a 50-50 Manhattan instead, but are there things you would do to take the edge off of a Manhattan?
Um, yeah, I think similarly having that kind of richness can play into it. Again, it depends on what vermouth you're using, because there are some really rich ones. Like if you're using Carpano, I feel like
Right.
it's already quite rich.
Yep.
But if you're using like a French sweet vermouth, they can often come off quite dry. One trick I like to use, especially if you're using cherries in your Manhattan, is maybe using a bar spoon of the cherry liquid
Mm.
in there as well. You have that kind of preconceived flavor that's going to be existing in your Manhattan already when you see the cherry. The liquid is, I mean, if they're well made cherries, is delicious. I mean, obviously we're not talking about like the neon red maraschino cherries, but
Yep.
something that has like some nice like bassy spice notes and stuff like that. I think that's a good option. I mean, the other thing as well, when it comes to martinis and Manhattans, like, I don't think you have to be beholden to like the right rate to the ratio. Like, there's a right ratio for everybody.
Yep.
I personally like my martinis a little bit more wet. I've also been known to enjoy an inverted Manhattan, which is
Yep.
like more vermouth, obviously, than the rye or whatever spirit you're using. So maybe it's playing with that as well, in addition to adding in something like the cherry juice. Yeah.
You know what? That is a great point. Yeah, like I remember when I discovered. I mean, you could just call it an inverted martini, but like I think somebody at least called it the Astoria, and I was like, oh yeah, this is up my alley right here. And yeah, to your point, if you're using Carpano for a Manhattan one day and Dolan the next, Carpano is much sweeter, richer to Dolan. So yeah. Okay, but yeah, the idea of the cherry juice also makes sense as another avenue there.
Hmm.
I did real quick, and I bet I could find this on your guys' site. But when after a day or day and a half, you're breaking the skins of the cranberry, uh, is that mean, Jeff? Are you and you could be using one of your super fancy tools, but are you dropping them in a blender or just shaking it, or how are you breaking those skins? Just if I want to try that experiment on my own.
I'm using the fanciest tool that we have, which is a gloved hand. Literally, that's it. I put a glove on my hands and just physically break them. And I think the use of uh of having like a blender or something like that, it's gonna break it up a little bit too much, you know.
Yep.
Alternatively, a muddler would work just fine. But I just literally want to like pop the cranberry so you can get that alcohol infusing not only on the skins but throughout the cranberry. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're letting the cranberry sit in the tequila for about a day. You're popping them, then you're dropping them back in there for another hour, another day. How is that kind of working before you're straining it out eventually?
I mean, in all honesty, I for me when I'm making these processes, it's all derived by me tasting
Sure.
and
Fair enough.
drinking.
Fair
And
enough.
so our bar team, we've noticed, yeah, like one day whole cranberry, one day like kind of pop the cranberry, and then the next day is very good to go. It's very rich. But I wouldn't get hung up on it as a if you're a home bartender trying it at home, like just taste it. And like it's pretty difficult to over extract a cranberry.
Fair enough.
There's things like tea, like if you're throwing tea into your gin, you can really over extract that, and it could be really unpleasant
Yep.
because of the tannins. And yes, there's like natural tannins in the cranberry, but yeah, I've found that like if you let it sit longer, it's just going to get more flavorful, really. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I would
Okay.
say there is a minimum. Like you could throw it in for a day and it could get the color, but maybe a day and a half, 2 days, more than that is what you're looking for.
Okay. Terrific. I appreciate it. Um, so I've got like one other question in mind, and that's just in case you also have anything we haven't gotten to you'd love to talk about, just to kind of seed that. But working in a place like the lab, I have no doubt the number of experiments that can be run are just near infinite. But do you ever think about the industry in terms of like, is there ever like a point where we can go too far, or when we'll have discovered most things, or is it just things continue to infuse? Like, where do you think bartending will be in 5 years or 10 years? Do you have a way of even thinking about where we're headed right now as a field?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting question, and something that I talk a lot about with other bar friends of mine. The idea of like reaching peak cocktail, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's going so many different ways, and I think that's the exciting thing about the cocktail world is, you know, we are a relatively new part of our societal experience. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, alcohol has existed for forever in different ways. Dining has existed for a very very long time, but the cocktail world and the way that cocktails are curated and crafted and how they fit into our dining experiences, our social experiences, our personal experiences is so multifaceted. It's hard to say. I mean, like, I think that part of it is, cyclical, and we're starting to see the return of like really dumb drinks and really like really silly blue like whatever, and
Yep.
starting to see things that are like reticent of drinks from the 80s 90s, which oftentimes people think of as the dark ages. But I think revisiting times like that with like really thoughtful curation of ingredients can be really fun. So that's the side of it. I mean, the side that Botanist is really stuck on, or is really focused on, excuse me, is a little bit more of that nuanced curation and storytelling. And I like when people ask me what our bar program is, I always say it's in the name, and I say botany is what we're interested in. And botany to me is that kind of the sliver in the Venn diagram between science and nature, and how we kind of curate that element. So I guess all of that to be said is it's the future of cocktails, and the future of making drinks is multifaceted, and it kind of permeates through different things. And I think that's what's exciting, because a place like Botanist and the program that I run here, that wouldn't fly, in the 80s, 90s, even 2000s, when people were starting to look at like prohibition era cocktails and
Right.
speakeasy. Like we
Right.
are not that, and we're very different. Um, Conversely, same too with people like Kelsey Ramage, who create things like Trash Tiki. Like that's a new avenue of sustainability and of stewardship, and of those kind of things that weren't thought of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I to answer your question, I think we'll never reach a point where we've gone too far, and discovered everything, because we're always finding new things and that kind of thing. But we're also um, the evolution of cocktail culture and history really relies on the people who run it, and who are excited by it. And those people, again, like I said, the best bartenders are multifaceted individuals, and will bring their own identities and thoughts and processes to the fore.
Yeah, and you're definitely right in that you're seeing the emergence of more the maximalist than the minimalist cocktail now, but that doesn't mean the minimalist cocktail's gone. And yeah, you've got Miami Vices popping back up, and so yeah, it's uh diving deeper, rediscovering, and just watching things atomize because different bars are doing different things as opposed to cocktails are this one thing. So you are, yeah, no, that makes real good sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Jeff, like regarding if people want to see the crazy stuff happening at Botanist or follow your own work, where should they look you guys up at this point?
Well, I mean, Instagram is still something we happily use. So my personal one is Father of Cups, just as it sounds.
Okay.
And then Botanist is Botanist Dining as well. So yeah, I mean, please throw us a follow. We're in the mode right now of doing some really interesting collaborations. So that's always super fun, and that's kind of the first avenue to see that. In the past little while, we had Masa here with Katana Kitten, which was
Hmm.
like very very fun, and that man is a perfect specimen of a human being. And we also had Harrison and Ricky up from Saga Overstory Crown Shy, which that was super fun as well. Those guys are absolutely awesome. Coming up in November as well, we've got the people from Hanky Panky coming through
Mm.
um, from Mexico City, which that one is going to be really exciting. Our executive chef Hector Laguna is from just outside of Mexico City, and he's like very very excited about it. Um, we'll be hosting that on Dia de los Muertos, which is like, yeah, I mean, how much more fun can you get? So
Eh,
yeah, I think that our Instagrams are maybe the best way to do that. And then yeah, like please, anybody who's listening to this, and yourself included, Chris, please come sit at the bar and chat.
that sounds tempting, and yeah, I mean, I need to make my way to Vancouver for that because you're right. Dia de los Muertos for that. That sounds perfect. Jeez.
Super fun, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Is there anything else we haven't covered that you'd want to get in that we haven't dug into?
Um, I think we've talked about some really fun things. Obviously, I love talking about cocktails. I guess just the other thing that I think is really important to mention when you're talking about the history, or sorry, the future trajectory of cocktails and cocktail culture. I think one of the things that's really excited me and really inspired me about uh, the way that my colleagues have gone about things, and what I see in our bar as well, is just that kind of self-awareness, I guess, when it comes down to it, is self-awareness of inclusivity, and building safe spaces is super critical when it comes to making fun cocktails. I think that you did quote me correctly on saying the difference between a bartender and a mixologist is about 10 minutes per drink. um, but I also think that one of the things that's really, really important for bartenders, and we've seen it time and again, is the importance of creating a safe and inclusive space for people to enjoy drinks. You know, there's a lot of not nice things happening in our world right now, and it's hard to pretend that that doesn't exist. And I think of my job as, you know, creating that quote unquote third space, you know, from work and from home and personal life to engage with other people and to be feeling like you're part of culture and part of society. And in my estimation, and in everybody's estimation of bartenders that I love and respect, there is absolutely no space for anything other than acceptance and tolerance. Yeah, I think when it comes to the future of cocktails, bartenders that I know here in Canada and around the world, it's in good hands, and I'm quite excited to see how that progresses, and what a little bit more inclusivity can mean to cocktail programs around the world.
Jeff, are there for anybody that rings a bell with, are there any resources or general watch outs? I mean, obviously, if there's very flagrant things happening in a workplace, I mean, that's easy to pick up on. But for people that say, hey, you know what? He's right. And we're not a mean place, but we're not making enough of an effort. Is it just purely about being more mindful? Are there things you'd recommend people look up if they wanted to dig into this a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, pretty much anywhere you are in your city, I think there's a lot of resources that exist within that city. So I think a quick rudimentary like search throughout throughout Google and whatever to see, like, because I can speak to what exists here in Canada, and I can speak to some amazing projects that are happening here, but I want to make sure that, you know, the impetus is to see what's local, I think. And, you know, each community has different demographics, of course, has different social issues and that kind of thing. And
Yep.
you know, us here in Vancouver, we have a lot of different issues than somebody maybe in Tulsa or in, you know, New Orleans and that kind of thing. And so I would be remiss to say there's some specific things that I can point to. I mean, I can, but I think the most important thing is to connect with your community, connect with people in a meaningful way, to, you know, to build that space for us. You know, some of the things that we really value is, you know, connections with things like the Dandelion Institute, Dandelion Initiative, excuse me, that focuses on making safe spaces for you know, the ensuring that there's no, you know, sexual harassment or any workplace misconduct in that regard. I think that's super important. We're also connected with, you know, a lot of initiatives here in Vancouver that center around Indigenous people and respectfully curating space and respectfully like learning through the challenges that we have in Canada and in Vancouver when it comes to reconciliation. And you know, another thing that we're really, I guess, Vancouver is at the forefront, for better or for worse, and is kind of the addressing the opioid crisis and things like that. And so we really do focus on connectivity within those things. But I would say again, those are our things that we need to focus on. And I think that anybody in other parts of the world, and anybody who's listening to this who runs a bar program, just like take a think about the issues that are affecting your community, the issues that you would like to see addressed, and reach out. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work out. You know, I've certainly reached out to groups that are like, you know, this is great, thank you, but, you know, we don't want to be, you know, a part of, you know, alcohol consumption and that kind of thing, which is totally understandable.
Yep.
But sometimes those connections can be like very, very meaningful. You know, I had reached out and connected with pre-pandemic, reached out and connected with a group called the Better Life Foundation, which works to feed people who experience food insecurity, and they work with a lot of different things, but that's one of their main things. And my experience with that lends me to urge people to do similarly, because it really has enriched my life, and it's really taken my idea of hospitality and extended it beyond the bar stools at my bar, and extended it beyond the walls of my bar to see what the community looks like. And so, yeah, I guess just maybe doing that kind of thing, and doing a little bit of the research about what's going on in your community and how your bar can help, it gives me shivers to think about like what that's done for my head and my heart. And I can only urge people to do the same thing in different aspects.
That's no, thank you for sharing that. I do think it's nice to see in many corners of our industry, despite the ravages of the pandemic, I feel like it certainly pushed some of these things even more to the forefront in terms of how do we want to treat people here? How do we make this career more sustainable as cocktails become more of this pervasive thing? And so, the treatment of the staff, but of course, how do we also, as this industry ascends, how do we become an even better player in our community too? So no, it's very well spun, and I appreciate you also being not quick to prescribe a specific game plan, because Vancouver is not the same as Mexico City or whatever. So yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm gonna definitely. I've not heard of the Dandelion Initiative before, so I'm gonna have to look that up and see what that's all about.
Yeah, please do.
But yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time today. This has been great and giving me honestly quite a bit to think about. So I really appreciate it.
I absolutely appreciate the conversation. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Hey everybody, thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter, or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe, or of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktailing.